The power went out at 3 in the morning, and I knew immediately that my basement was going to flood if I didn't get the backup generator running within the hour. I lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut, in one of those planned communities where everything looks picture perfect from the outside, but is controlled by a nightmare HOA that treats grown adults like children who can't be trusted to mow their own lawns. The February ice storm had knocked out power to half the county, and the temperature was already climbing into the 40s. The thaw had started, which meant thousands of gallons of melted snow and ice were going to start flowing downhill, and my house sat at the bottom of a natural drainage basin. I pulled on my boots and coat, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out to the garage where I kept my Honda EU7000's generator. It was a good machine, practically silent compared to the cheap ones, and I had installed it myself with a proper transfer switch so it would not backfeed into the grid. I had spent over $4,000 making sure everything was done right and safe. The generator fired up on the second pull, and I felt the relief wash over me as the transfer switch kicked in and power started flowing back into the house. I could hear the sump pump in the basement immediately kick into gear, already working to expel the water that had started accumulating. The power company estimated restoration would take at least 12 hours, maybe more. Without that generator, my finished basement with all my tools and my home office would be completely underwater by morning. I went back inside, made myself some coffee since I was already awake, and sat down to catch up on some work emails. That's when I saw her. Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, was standing in her driveway across the street in a bathrobe and slippers, arms crossed, staring directly at my house. More specifically, she was staring at my garage where the gentle hum of the generator could be heard if you were really listening for it. It was barely noticeable, honestly. I had specifically bought the quietest model available for this exact reason. I watched her pull out her phone and start typing furiously. I knew what was coming. Sure enough, at 7:30 that morning, I found an official HOA violation notice stuffed in my mailbox. According to the notice, I was in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection C of the Community Guidelines, which prohibited the operation of generators, machinery, or other noise-producing equipment between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. without prior written approval from the HOA board. I read it 3 times, my coffee going cold in my hand. They were fining me $500 for running a generator during a power outage to prevent my house from flooding. The notice went on to say that if I did not cease operation immediately and pay the fine within 7 days, I would be subject to additional daily fines of $100 and potential legal action. I called my neighbor, Marcus, who lived 2 doors down. He was the only reasonable person on the HOA board, though he was outvoted constantly by Brenda and her 2 cronies. "Marcus, did you know about this?" I asked when he picked up. "About what?" "I just got power back an hour ago. Brenda is fining me for running my backup generator during the outage." There was a long pause. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. $500. "Logan, that's insane. Let me call her. This is exactly the kind of thing a generator is for." "Appreciate it, man." But Marcus called me back 20 minutes later with bad news. "She's not budging. I talked to her and she said rules are rules. She said if she makes an exception for you, then everyone will want to run generators whenever they feel like it. During emergencies, Marcus. During actual emergencies." "I know. I tried. Karen and Deborah are backing her up too. I'm the only dissenting vote." Karen Hutchins and Deborah Winters were the other 2 board members, both cut from the same cloth as Brenda. All 3 were middle-aged women with too much time on their hands and an obsessive need to control everything and everyone around them. I paid the fine because I didn't have the energy to fight it right then, but something snapped inside me. I had been a good homeowner. I followed the rules, paid my HOA fees on time, kept my lawn perfect, painted my house the approved colors, and never caused any trouble. And this was how they treated me when I was literally just trying to prevent thousands of dollars in water damage. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to what the HOA was actually doing with our money. We paid $300 a month in fees, which for a community of 85 houses meant they were bringing in over $300,000 a year. Where was all that money going? I requested financial records, which I was legally entitled to see as a homeowner in the association. Brenda dragged her feet, but eventually she had to comply. When I finally got the documents, I started digging through them with a fine-tooth comb. That's when I found it. The HOA had installed a centralized sump pump system 3 years ago for the common areas and several of the community drainage zones. It was a big project, cost over $100,000, and was supposed to protect the whole neighborhood from flooding during heavy rains and rapid thaws. The pumps were housed in several utility boxes scattered around the community, and they all ran on electricity from the main grid. But here was the interesting part. Buried in the meeting notes from the planning phase, there had been a proposal to include battery backup systems for the sump pumps in case of power outages. The proposal had been shot down by Brenda, who argued it was an unnecessary expense. She had convinced the board that power outages were rare enough, that it wasn't worth the extra $15,000 for backup systems. I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. March came in like a lion, and the weather reports were predicting another major storm system. This one was going to be worse than the February ice storm. They were calling for heavy snow followed by rapid temperature spikes and rain, the perfect recipe for major flooding. I started preparing. I stocked up on sandbags for my property. I cleared all my gutters and downspouts. I made sure my generator was fueled up and ready to go. And then I did something that might have been petty, but I felt entirely justified doing it. I documented everything. I took photos of all the HOA sump pump stations. I noted their locations, their condition, and most importantly, the fact that they had no backup power supplies. I went back through the HOA financial records and made copies of everything related to the pump system, including the rejected proposal for backup batteries. The storm hit on March 15th. It started with 8 inches of heavy wet snow, and then the temperature spiked to 55 degrees with steady rain. It was a disaster waiting to happen. My power went out at 2 in the afternoon. I waited exactly 6 hours until 8:01 p.m., which was after the quiet hours restriction ended. Then I started my generator. My sump pump kicked on and started working. I could hear it cycling every few minutes as the water table rose and the snowmelt started flowing downhill toward my house. My basement stayed dry, but I knew what was happening elsewhere in the neighborhood. Without power, the HOA's centralized sump pumps had stopped working. All that water flowing downhill had nowhere to go. The drainage basins started filling up. The retention ponds overflowed. And because my house was at the bottom of the hill, I could actually see the water starting to pool in the streets and in my neighbors' yards. My phone started ringing. It was Marcus. "Logan, are you seeing this?" "Yeah, I'm seeing it. The HOA pumps are down. We're going to have major flooding. Some people's basements are already starting to take on water." "That's terrible," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want my neighbors to suffer, but I also knew this wasn't my problem to solve. "You think your generator could power one of the pump stations?" I had been expecting this question. "Marcus, My generator is sized specifically for my house. It's already running my sump pump, my refrigerator, and some lights. I don't have capacity for anything else, and even if I did, Brenda made it very clear that running generators is against the rules. Logan, come on. This is different. Is it? Because she didn't think so when my basement was about to flood. Rules are rules, right? That's what she said. There was a long silence. I get it. I do. But people are going to be really hurt by this. Then maybe the HOA should have installed backup power like they were supposed to. Or maybe Brenda shouldn't have spent that money on new decorative lampposts for the main entrance instead. She did what? Check the financial records, Marcus. March of last year. $18,000 for fancy lights that we didn't need while we have critical infrastructure with no backup power. Marcus hung up, but I knew he was going to go look it up. The calls kept coming. First from other neighbors, then from Karen Hutchins, then finally from Brenda herself. Mr. Spencer, this is Brenda Patterson. I'm calling in my capacity as HOA president to request your assistance with an emergency situation. What kind of emergency, Brenda? The centralized sump pumps are offline due to the power outage, and we need to borrow your generator to power them. I'm using my generator for my house. This is a community emergency. We need everyone to work together. You mean like how you worked with me when I was trying to prevent my house from flooding, when you fined me $500? Her tone went cold. That was different. You were in violation of community guidelines. And yet here we are, with a much bigger problem that could have been prevented if you had approved backup power for the pumps. Which, by the way, I have documentation showing was proposed and rejected. Are you seriously going to let your neighbors' homes flood out of spite? I'm protecting my own property, which is exactly what you should have done by installing proper backup systems. This isn't spite, Brenda. This is consequence. I will have you removed from this community. Good luck with that. I'm not in violation of any rules. It's after 8 p.m. and I'm running my generator to protect my property during an emergency, which is exactly what generators are for. She hung up on me. Over the next 12 hours, the situation got worse. 6 houses took on significant water damage in their basements. 2 had sewage backups. The community retention pond overflowed and flooded the park area, destroying the playground equipment. The total damage was estimated at over $200,000. And through it all, my basement stayed perfectly dry. The power came back on at 4 in the morning. I shut down my generator and went to bed, exhausted but satisfied. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 2 days later. It was held in the community clubhouse, and nearly every homeowner showed up. People were angry, and they wanted answers. Brenda tried to take control of the meeting immediately. We're here to discuss the unfortunate events of the recent storm and determine our path forward for recovery and repairs. A woman near the front stood up. Her name was Patricia, and I knew her house had been badly flooded. I want to know why we didn't have backup power for the sump pumps. My basement is destroyed. I lost 20 years of family photos and keepsakes. Brenda's expression tightened. The backup power systems were deemed too expensive during the initial installation. Marcus stood up. He had papers in his hand, and I recognized them as the financial records I had shown him. That's not entirely accurate, is it, Brenda? The backup systems would have cost $15,000 3 years ago, but last year you spent $18,000 on decorative light fixtures. The room erupted. People started shouting, demanding to see the financial records, asking why aesthetic improvements were prioritized over functional infrastructure. Brenda tried to regain control. Those decisions were made by the board with the community's best interests in mind. What about the $600 a month we're paying to your husband's landscaping company? Marcus continued. Even though 3 other companies bid lower for the same work. I hadn't known about that one. I looked at Marcus with new respect. That contract was awarded fairly, Brenda protested, but her face had gone red. And the $10,000 fee paid to Brenda Patterson Consulting for HOA management services. Marcus was on a roll now. Brenda, you are the HOA president. That's a volunteer position. You're not supposed to be paying yourself. The room went completely silent. Someone in the back shouted, "That's embezzlement." Brenda grabbed her purse. "I don't have to listen to these baseless accusations." She started heading for the door, but Marcus blocked her way. "Actually, you do. I've already contacted an attorney and the state's attorney general office. If there's been financial misconduct, we're going to find it." Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart for Brenda and her cronies. A forensic audit of the HOA finances revealed systematic financial mismanagement and likely fraud. Brenda had been paying herself through her consulting company for 3 years, totaling over $30,000. Her husband's landscaping company had been overcharging by about 40% compared to market rates. Karen Hutchins had funneled HOA money to her brother's construction company for repairs that were either unnecessary or never actually performed. The 3 of them had been treating the HOA like their personal piggy bank. I got a call from Detective Sarah Morrison from the Ridgefield Police Department. She wanted to interview me about the financial records I had copied and provided to Marcus. We met at the police station, and I walked her through everything I had found. She took detailed notes and made copies of all my documentation. "Mr. Spencer, you've been very helpful. I want you to know that we're taking this seriously. HOA fraud cases can be complicated, but when the amounts get into the tens of thousands of dollars, it becomes a significant criminal matter. What happens now? We continue our investigation, work with the state's attorney, and if we have sufficient evidence, we'll be making arrests." "Good. I do have to ask, and this is off the record, did you know the sump pumps were going to fail during that storm?" I chose my words carefully. "I knew they didn't have backup power. I knew that was a risk during any extended outage. But I had no way of knowing when or if the power would go out, or how severe the flooding would be." She nodded slowly. "And you used your generator for your own property?" "That's correct, which I'm legally entitled to do after 8 p.m. according to the HOA's own rules. Rules that they had previously fined you for violating during an emergency." "Yes." She closed her notebook. "Like I said off the record, sometimes karma is a beautiful thing. The arrests happened in early April. Brenda, Karen, and Deborah were all charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds. The total amount they had stolen over the years was estimated at over $75,000. I watched from my living room window as the police cars pulled up to Brenda's house. She came out in handcuffs, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. When she saw me watching, she screamed something I couldn't quite hear, but I could guess the general sentiment. The local news picked up the story. "HOA board members arrested in fraud scheme" was the headline. It made regional news and even got picked up by a few national outlets as part of the ongoing conversation about HOA overreach and corruption. The community had to elect an entirely new HOA board. Marcus became the new president, and he immediately set about fixing the damage. The first order of business was installing proper backup power systems for all the sump pumps. The second was conducting a full review of all contracts and expenses. The third was implementing new transparency requirements and oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. They also voted to amend the community guidelines regarding generators. The new rule allowed for backup generators during power outages, regardless of time of day, as long as they were properly installed and maintained. My $500 fine was refunded with a formal apology from the new board. The criminal cases took months to work their way through the system. Brenda's husband filed for divorce in May, which surprised nobody. The legal maneuvering was complex, but by September, all three women had accepted plea deals. Brenda got 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. She was ordered to pay full restitution for her share of the stolen funds. Karen got 18 months in probation. Deborah got 1 year because she cooperated more fully with investigators and her portion of the theft was smaller. On the day of sentencing, I sat in the courtroom gallery. I wanted to see it through to the end. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Catherine Brennan, had clearly done her homework on HOA fraud cases. "What you three did goes beyond simple theft," she said. "You violated the trust of your entire community. People elected you to protect their interests and their property values. Instead, you treated your positions as opportunities for personal enrichment. The fact that your actions indirectly contributed to extensive property damage during a natural disaster makes this even more egregious." Brenda tried to speak, but her attorney put a hand on her arm to stop her. "You had opportunities to do the right thing," the judge continued. "You could have installed proper safety systems. You could have managed the finances ethically. You could have treated Mr. Spencer's legitimate emergency with compassion instead of punitive fines. Every choice you made was the wrong one, driven by pettiness, greed, and a desire for control." The judge handed down the sentences, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying outside the courthouse. A reporter from the local news approached me. "Mr. Spencer, you're the homeowner who originally discovered the financial irregularities. How does it feel to see justice served?" "It feels like the system worked the way it's supposed to," I said. "But honestly, this should never have gotten this far. HOAs need better oversight from the start. Board members need to understand they're not little dictators. They're stewards of their neighbors' money and property. Some people might say you could have prevented the flooding during the storm by helping with the sump pumps. And I would say that critical infrastructure like that should never depend on the charity of individual homeowners. That's exactly what HOA fees are supposed to pay for. If Brenda had spent money on backup systems, instead of paying herself consulting fees, nobody's basement would have flooded." The reporter nodded. "That's a fair point." Life slowly returned to normal over the following months. The community healed. People repaired their basements. The new HOA board proved to be competent and reasonable. Marcus and I became good friends, often grilling out together on weekends and complaining about property taxes like normal suburban homeowners. The following winter, we had another ice storm. The power went out around midnight. I started my generator at 12:05 a.m., and nobody said a word. My sump pump kept running. My basement stayed dry, but this time, so did everyone else's, because the HOA's backup power systems kicked in automatically, keeping the centralized pumps running throughout the outage. I stood in my garage, listening to the quiet hum of my generator, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time when it came to my HOA. Pride. Pride that we had fixed a broken system. Pride that we had held corrupt people accountable. Pride that our community was stronger because of it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Generator running okay, just making sure you're all good." I smiled and typed back. "Running perfectly. How are the community pumps? All green. Battery backups holding strong. This is what it's supposed to look like." "Yeah," I replied. "Yeah, it is." I went back inside, poured myself a bourbon, and sat by the window watching the ice accumulate on the trees. It was beautiful in its own way, the storm. Nature doing what nature does, indifferent to our human concerns about property and possessions, but we weren't helpless against it anymore. We had learned our lessons the hard way, paid the price for arrogance and corruption, and come out the other side better prepared. The next morning, the sun came out and started melting the ice. Everything sparkled like diamonds. The power came back on around 10 a.m. and life resumed its normal rhythm. I got a call from Patricia, the woman who had lost her family photos in the flood. "Logan, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to them. For finding the fraud. I know some people think you should have helped during that storm, but I get it. If you had bailed them out, none of this would have come to light. We would still have Brenda stealing from us, and the next storm would have flooded us all over again." "I appreciate you saying that. How are you doing?" "I know you lost a lot. I'm okay. We're okay. Some things you can't replace, but we're moving forward. And knowing that it meant something, that it led to real change, it helps. I'm glad." After we hung up, I thought about what she said. It was true that I could have tried to help during that storm. I could have run extension cords or tried to power one of the pump stations or done something. But she was right. If I had, Brenda would still be in charge, still stealing, still abusing her power. Sometimes you have to let things break before you can fix them properly. The property values in our community actually went up over the next year. Word got around that we had cleaned house, that we had new leadership, that we had better infrastructure. People wanted to live in a place where the HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to. I ran into Brenda's ex-husband at the grocery store about a year after everything went down. He looked like a different person, lighter somehow, like he had been carrying a heavy burden that was finally gone. "Logan," he said, stopping his cart near mine. "Hey, Tom. I just wanted to say, I had no idea what she was doing. The embezzlement, I mean. The landscaping thing, yeah, I benefited from that and I'm not proud of it, but I didn't know about the rest." "I believe you." "Do you really?" "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "You always seemed like a decent guy who was just stuck with a terrible partner." He laughed, but it was a sad sound. "That's probably the most accurate description of my marriage I've ever heard. Anyway, I paid back the money from the overcharging, talked to Marcus, worked out a payment plan. I wanted to make it right." "That's good of you, Tom. It's the least I could do." She ruined a lot of things, but I don't have to let her ruin my integrity too. We shook hands and went our separate ways. I found myself hoping he would be okay, that he would find someone better, that he would have a happier life. 2 years after the arrests, I was at another HOA meeting. These meetings were completely different now. They were efficient, transparent, and actually focused on community improvement rather than power trips. Marcus stood at the front of the room. "Last item on the agenda, we've been approached by a local journalist who wants to do a feature story on our community transformation. It would involve interviews, photos, the whole thing. I wanted to get everyone's thoughts before agreeing to it." People murmured among themselves. Someone raised their hand. "Will this bring up all the old stuff about Brenda and the others?" "Probably," Marcus said honestly. "But it would also highlight how we fixed the problems, how we improved our governance, how we're an example of an HOA doing things right." Another person spoke up. "I think we should do it. Other communities need to know what to watch out for, and they need to know that change is possible." The vote was nearly unanimous in favor. The journalist who came out was thorough and fair. She interviewed dozens of homeowners, talked to the police, reviewed court records, and spent time understanding what had gone wrong and how we had fixed it. When the article came out, it was titled "From Corruption to Community: How One HOA Turned Itself Around." It was balanced, acknowledging both the damage that had been done and the work that had gone into repairing it. The article quoted me extensively. I talked about the generator fine, about finding the financial irregularities, about the difficult decision not to help during the storm. I was honest about my motivations, about the anger I felt, about the satisfaction of seeing justice served, and about the ongoing work of building something better. The article went viral in homeowner association communities around the country. Marcus started getting calls from other HOAs asking for advice on governance, transparency, and oversight. He eventually wrote a handbook on HOA best practices that got distributed pretty widely. As for me, I just went back to being a regular homeowner. I maintained my house, paid my now much more reasonable HOA fees, and served on a couple of committees when asked. I kept my generator maintained and ready, but thankfully only had to use it a couple more times over the years. The scars from that period eventually faded. New families moved into the neighborhood who had never known the Brenda era. They just knew our HOA as one that functioned well, that maintained the property, that treated homeowners with respect. But those of us who had lived through it never forgot the lessons. We stayed vigilant about finances. We questioned decisions. We insisted on transparency. We made sure that no one person ever had too much control again. 5 years after the arrests, Brenda was released from prison on parole. I heard she moved to Florida, trying to start fresh somewhere no one knew her story. I hoped she had learned something, but I honestly doubted it. People like that rarely change. Karen and Deborah also moved away after serving their sentences. The last I heard, Karen was working retail and Deborah was living with her daughter's family. Their lives had been permanently diminished by their choices, and while I didn't take pleasure in that, I didn't feel particularly sorry for them either. One evening, about 6 years after everything started, I was sitting on my back deck with my wife Deanna, who I had started dating a year after the whole mess ended, and married 2 years later. She had moved into the house with me and had become active in the community herself. "Do you ever regret how you handled things?" she asked me out of nowhere, with Brenda and the generator. Yeah, I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I finally said. "I mean, I wish the situation had never happened in the first place. I wish people hadn't gotten flooded. But given the circumstances, given how they treated me, given what they were doing with everyone's money, no, I don't regret it. Some people still think you should have helped during the storm. Some people will always think that, and that's okay. They're entitled to their opinion. But those same people benefit every day from the changes that came because of what happened. Better infrastructure, honest leadership, transparent finances. That doesn't happen if I bail out Brenda that night." Deanna took my hand. "You're a good man, Logan Spencer, even when you're being petty." I laughed. "Especially when I'm being petty." We sat there watching the sunset, the community around us peaceful and well-maintained, the Sump pumps humming quietly in their stations with full battery backups, ready for whatever storm might come next. And I thought about how strange it was that a $500 fine and a backup generator had set in motion events that transformed an entire community. How standing up for yourself, even in small ways, could have ripples you never anticipated. The truth was, I had not set out to be a hero or a whistleblower. I had just been a guy trying to keep his basement from flooding, who got punished for doing the right thing, and who decided he had had enough of being pushed around by petty tyrants. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. One person saying no. One person demanding better. One person willing to stand in the storm and let the consequences fall where they may. My generator sat in the garage, clean and maintained, ready for the next emergency. But more importantly, our community was ready too, protected by proper systems, guided by honest leadership, and strengthened by the knowledge that we could overcome even our worst impulses if we were willing to hold each other accountable. The lights of the neighborhood flickered on as evening fell, each house a small beacon against the darkness, including mine, including the houses that had flooded that night so many years ago, including the spots where Brenda, Karen, and Deborah used to live. All of us moving forward, all of us learning, all of us trying to build something better than what came before. And that, ultimately, was the whole point.